Well, we drew straws to see who would teach this class this morning, and I drew the short one. so I am the guy. There you go. Vern, can I get you to lead us in prayer, please?
Father in heaven, we come to you this morning, and we're thankful that you've given us the ability to come and study your word with those of like precious faith. Thank you for your word, for the wisdom that you give to us. Father, we ask that we study this morning, that you may open our hearts and help us to find ways that we may ever look closer to how you have us and be more like you. Thank you for your Son, for the gift you gave in life on the cross. We ask you to help us to remember that as we go to worship later on this morning.
Man. Not sure what's going to happen with this class now that Terry has left for Colorado. Well, yeah, it's working. But the elders asked me to teach it at least this morning. I'm not sure if Jeremy will have it going forward next week or exactly what's going on. But I know Terry had been studying in Genesis, not sure where he left off, but I know it was before Genesis chapter 5. And so I thought I would just talk about something from Genesis chapter 5 this morning that I hope will be of benefit to all of you, specifically, as noted on the PowerPoint, what is said there in Genesis 5:21 through 24. As I read this lineage in Genesis chapter 5, and it is somewhat of a lengthy one, although there aren't but 10 generations listed here, it reminds me kind of and we ask the question, why? This, I think, for us is maybe portions of it at least are somewhat of a boring read. We tend to skip over. I know when I do the daily Bible reading thing, if we come to one of these chapters of lineages, that's one I'll skip, because who wants to read who begot who and those kinds of things. And so we wonder why these are important. And as I was reading this and thinking about it, it reminded me a lot of my dad. And he was one of these guys who loves to go through cemeteries. And I remember back several years ago when my aunt had died, that my brother and I took my dad down to Floresville, south of San Antonio, where she was going to have her funeral. And after the funeral, we skipped where she was going to be buried, and we went to the cemetery in Stockdale, because that was the cemetery where most of the older folks in my dad's lineage were buried. And so we went out there, and my dad just loved to go through these cemeteries. He, not only for his own family benefit, but he was kind of a Civil War buff, and so my sister took him to the east a number of years ago when he was still alive, and took him through all of those old Civil War cemeteries, and he just loved it. And so as my brother and I were with him there in Stockdale, we went out and we started looking at different grave markers, and he would see one and he would recognize that name, and he would say, now this was my dad's nephew, or my dad's cousin, or this was my mom's sister's whatever, And he would explain how these people were all related to one another. And I think that's what we have here in Genesis chapter 5, and in a number of other passages, is God's cemetery. And in this passage, it's God's antediluvian, or before the flood, cemetery, where God walks us through. It's kind of like we're looking at the gravestones, and this is this man's son who had these children, and he's related to this other person in this way, and he was born, and this is how long he lived, and this is his death. Things that you see written on a gravestone in a cemetery. And so I'm going to let you teach the class for just a few minutes. Let's start, and we're not going to read all of these for several reasons. One, because it does get a little bit tedious, and two, because half of these names I can't even pronounce, and I am not going to give you the satisfaction of listening to me try to pronounce them. But it begins in chapter 5 and verse 1. This is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. He created them, male and female, and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. And he begot Seth, or after he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Seth lived 105 years and begot Enoch. After he begot Enoch, Seth lived 807 years and had sons and daughters. All the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And he goes on and talks about Seth's son and Enosh's son and those kind of things. And we come down then to verse 25. This is Methuselah. He is the ninth in this line of men. Methuselah lived 187 years and begot Lamech. And after he begot Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Lamech lived 182 years and had a son. He called his name Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." After he begot Noah, Lamech lived 595 years and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, so we have this list of men. And what I want to start out is asking you, what impresses you about this list of 10 generations? Okay. How long do people live? People lived a long time. Methuselah is the oldest recorded person to ever live, 969 years. Can you imagine? 900.
If the aches and pains I have at 72 were 969 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. That's obvious. And
Did they count time the same back then as they do now?
I see no indication that they did not, that 365 days was a year, just like it is now. That some have tried to explain it that way. I think they just lived a long time. And
So God had a real purpose for them, didn't
he
he?
did. And I think when you look at, well, I was going to say, when you look at the condition of things compared to after the flood changed a lot of things. And you see after the flood, these people are living 969 years plus, and some just a little bit below that. And then after the flood, they start living 600 years, and then 500 years, then 400 years. You get to Abraham, huh?
Now we're down to 70.
Yeah. Well, you get to Abraham, and what did he live? 176, something like that, I think. And was an old man at 176. And I think the reason for that, I think we don't realize sometimes how much the flood changed this world. There are a lot of things in existence today that weren't in existence then. It seems to me, from what we read in these first several chapters of Genesis, that there was this large canopy over the earth. Genesis chapter 2 talks about the canopy, and that it had never rained, but a mist came up from the earth. I suspect that was true all the way to the flood. I've read somewhere, if all the water in the sky fell now, it would leave a trace on the earth. The water fell from the sky, and it flooded the earth. So there was obviously something up there that God did not replace after the flood. And so we see all kinds of things come into existence, all kinds of changes made. In Genesis chapter 9, when Noah and his family come out of the ark, it is noted there that there are a number of changes in the way that Noah and his family and those living after them would live their lives. If the earth changed significantly, then it is not surprising then that humanity changed significantly. And I do believe that what you have after the flood is not only the influence of the sun, because the canopy is no longer there, and we know that what the sun does to us. I'm sure there were bacterias and stuff that were not significant, at least before the flood, that were afterwards. And so there are a lot of things that cause people to not live as long. And so I think that's why we see that breakdown in the number of years. Yes, ma'am.
It also in chapter 6, verse 3, then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. So it was a purposeful thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Just a cause and effect.
Yeah, God's determination was. And so God, it almost seems as if God saw something in man living almost 1,000 years that was not beneficial to man.
Well, you think about it, if you're going to live forever, you're going to find things to fill your time with.
Exactly,
Not
yeah.
always good.
And you don't have as much of you're not as in touch with your mortality, maybe, as, I got 950 years to do this right. Yeah. A lot of difference. I'm 69 now, so I've got 900 years to catch up with Methuselah. I'm 68. I'll be 69 in January. But I'm really feeling my mortality now. If I had 900 years to go, I probably wouldn't be feeling it as significantly. And so they're just, there's a lot of significance to the fact that people lived a long time in that day and time, and they don't live as long now. What's something else that strikes you as you read these 10 generations?
I think the sun has a lot to do with it. It almost took me out 3 years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, three years ago, I had 3 months to live, but
Yeah.
the doctor's thought. But so I think the sun may have a lot to do with it, taking away that canopy which protected the earth from the sun.
Yeah.
It never rained prior to the flood, did it?
I don't think it did.
So I think the flood was the first time it had ever rained.
Yeah. Because I know the rainbow was established in Genesis chapter 9. And that's the first time you read of really of clouds and of rainbow. And rain is first mentioned when God flooded the earth. Which, if I have to teach this class for another week or two, we'll talk about the flood maybe some. And you think I will? Jeremy will be back next week. Just saying.
Just a heads up.
Yeah. But what's something else?
The nutrients, well, I think the nutrients because of the sun and the land, like you said with the sun, created deserts, created,
Mhm.
humidity and everything.
Yeah.
change the nutrition of what they ate.
Yeah. Yeah, the world wasn't a Garden of Eden after God cast Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, but it had some significant difference, and that's what sin did to this world.
Curious if you had deserts prior to the flood.
I'm going to guess not.
I wouldn't think so,
guessing
the
not.
sun is.
Yeah.
I never thought about that, but
Yeah.
I'm guessing you didn't have deserts. But you can't have plant growth without light, so a certain amount of light had to come
Yeah.
through because you otherwise wouldn't have photosynthesis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
more filtered maybe.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Looking further there in chapter 6, talks about God was regretted he made man because of the sin.
Mhm.
So did the amount of sin cause shortening of life?
I think that led God to what Anna said, that God determined that man's age would go, at least get down to eventually about 120 years. And I think that was
So eventually
the
the
result. Yeah, when you get the Proverbs or Psalms or Ecclesiastes 1. Yeah.
man's days shall be 70.
And possibly fourscore if he lives, yeah.
I don't know if this is what you're fishing for, but they had children much later, but kind of proportional
Yeah.
to their lifespan. Like, if they lived 800 years and had their kids at 150.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely one. That's not one I have on my list, but that would go along with that long life. I mean, they were having kids at, 200 years and that kind of thing, 105
Did they
years.
have more kids?
More kids than what are listed in here?
No. Than they do now.
Oh, yeah. They lived
I-
all those, they had
yeah.
kids probably every generation.
They just don't list.
I have no idea.
Well, it says
Well,
they
it
had
says
other
sons
children
and
and daughters.
And have to be
Say how
fruitful,
many.
multiply, and
Okay.
Yeah, that's true, yeah, yeah.
Our youth today are not having children that much.
Yeah.
Our population's like,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
If we chart these dates, length of time, in a straight line, show where they overlap, you find that the death of Methuselah and I think his son, Enoch, end at the time of the flood.
Yeah, definitely Methuselah. I didn't calculate Lamech, but definitely Methuselah died the same year as the flood. And I read something, there was one of the possible definitions of the name Methuselah had something to do with when he dies, earth will do something, be destroyed or something to that effect. And so in his name, maybe there was even this sense of prophecy that the earth was going to come to an end. And all of that's kind of fascinating stuff. 10 generations. What does it say about the age of the earth? Or the age of man? Man been here 100,000 years?
Well, and to Ron's point, that if you look at it that way, I don't remember exactly, but I think that Noah, whenever he was born, like Seth or Seth's son or someone like that, was still alive.
Yeah.
You're not, there is no one really in our society who knows anyone who maybe died in the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
It's too far back.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't work out.
Much less American Revolution.
Sure,
or-
yeah,
yeah.
long way from that, but these, like, they, theoretically, Noah could have known someone who knew Adam.
Yeah, he could have very well known Seth. Noah didn't die that much earlier than Noah was born, yeah. But I think what this impresses upon us, and there's been questions about, are we looking at direct descendants here, or is he just kind of looking at the mountaintops? You know, you get on a mountain and you look across and you see these mountaintops, and each person that is listed as one of the 10, we'll call them patriarchs of that age, is a mountaintop. Well, that could be, but I'll tell you, it'd take a lot of mountains a long distance away from one another to get to 100,000 years, which is what they say is the age of modern man. Clearly, the Bible does not teach that. The Bible teaches that earth has been in existence and mankind has been on the earth for a far shorter time than what evolution says it has and requires that it be. About 6,000 if you take all of these, you know, if Enoch was the son of Seth and not his grandson or great-grandson or something to that. Yeah, you're looking at about 6,000, a little over 6,000. And thirdly, it defines human existence on earth. What is human existence about? Well, we're born, we live for a time, we procreate, and in that way, I don't know that there is a way that we make a more significant impact on this earth than in having children. So we procreate, we live a while longer, and we die. And I think this is defining what life is for us. And you look at that and you go, well, man, that's kind of a bad way of looking at it. Not really. Life is what it is, and this is the reality of life. We're born, we live, we procreate, we live a while longer, and then we die. That's going to define your life in large measure. Go over to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Here's what Solomon says. I said in my heart concerning the condition of the sons of men, God tests them that they may see that they themselves are like animals. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. One thing befalls them all. What is that one thing? Death. As one dies, so dies the other. Surely they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. Okay, what we need to realize about Solomon in this portion of Ecclesiastes, he is looking at life under the sun as we can see it with our eyes. As we see it with our eyes, is there any difference in a human dying and a dog dying? As we see it with our eyes, there's no difference at all. The dog quits breathing, we quit breathing. The dog dies, we die. And that's what he's talking about here, that there is a similarity in the end of man and animal, all animals. He says in verse 20, all go to one place. All are from the dust, and all return to the dust. Same thing is going to happen to your body that happens to every other living thing. And he says, who knows the spirit of the sons of men which goes upward, and the spirit of the animal which goes down to the earth? Now in verse 21, he gets to the spiritual significance. There is something different about the death of man and the death of the animal that is beyond the human side, and that is that man has a eternal spirit, a soul that returns to God. He's going to talk about that further in Ecclesiastes chapter 12. The body goes to the dust of the ground. The spirit returns to God who gave it. And so he says in verse 22, so I perceive that nothing is better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his heritage. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Okay? there's a sense, I think, that he is talking about here, that recognizing that the same thing happens to us physically that happens to the animals physically, and taking the spiritual nature out of it, there is a way that we approach life. If life is about being born, living, procreating, living a little while longer, and then dying, what we see over and over again in Ecclesiastes talks a lot about death. But what we see over and over again is enjoy life. Realize that this is what life is going to be about. Don't dwell on death. Recognize that you have a responsibility, and he talks about that at the end, very end of Ecclesiastes in chapter 12. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. The King James says the whole duty of man. I think he's saying more than this is just what man has a responsibility to do, but this is what man is all about. Fear God and keep His commandments. Now, before he gets there, though, he says that we all have this certain amount of life, and life comes to an end. Don't get all shook up about the fact that life is going to come to an end one of these days. I'm going to die. Well, I don't need to dwell on that. What I need to do is enjoy the things that God has given to me. Enjoy this passage through life. And realize that you're going to pass away, and unless the Lord comes again, life is just going to keep churning. And that's what we see in Genesis 5. Life is churning. Seth dies, it's Enosh's time. Enosh dies, and it is Canaan's time. And so life just churns on and on and on. We're part of it. We enjoy our part of it. We take responsibility for our part of it, and then we will pass away, and our children will do the same thing. Yes, sir, Byron?
Another difference is the heritage that he talked about there. Man collects earthly possessions, and he passes those on to his children.
Mm-hmm.
And the animal doesn't do that. We're to work and take care of our families. And
Yeah.
in doing so, we collect earthly possessions.
Yeah.
And we can pass those on to the next generation. The animal can't do.
Yeah. And even in that, Solomon says, be careful that doesn't become your the thing that you dwell on is leaving a bunch of stuff to your kids. And you remember why he says that?
They don't want it anyway, I can tell you nowadays. It'll be sold as soon as you're gone.
There's a lot of truth to that. There are things that my mother had these collections of stuff, and she was just sure, that all her kids and grandkids were going to want her bells and her birds. And I finally had to tell my kids, if your mother offers you a bird, you take it. and if you take it home and throw it away, makes no difference, but you take it. And so they did out of obligation. You don't want that stuff. But guess what? Her kids didn't want it either. That's why she was passing it on to the grandkids. We have our stuff. They have their stuff. Kids have their stuff. And that's part of the world churning on. You pass away, and your kids take up the mantle, and their kids take it after them. And we're just part of it for a small amount of time. And on that, placing too much importance on leaving all this stuff for your kids, it's almost humorous what Solomon says at times. It's like, okay, this guy works his fingers to the bone. He gets all this stuff, and he's going to leave it to his family, maybe leave it to his wife, and what happens? She marries somebody else, and somebody else gets to enjoy his stuff. And so I think the whole point of that is realize what's important and what is not important in life. Work for the things that are important to you, and not for those things that are not important.
Pass on things, it should be what we're doing here
do it, or you're gonna pass on that it's okay to take a drink, and maybe I say a word when I get mad and this and that, you're gonna pass stuff on.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about it being birds, it's what are you gonna pass on?
Yeah, exactly. We need to be emphasizing the important things that we pass on to the generation after us. And
There's a song that says, work your fingers to the bones and what you get.
bony finger. Yeah, exactly.
Solomon also says, enjoy your work.
Yes.
So pick a profession that you enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. Just a lot of wisdom there in Ecclesiastes that if we bother to read it and pay attention to it, it'll save us a lot of heartache going through this life. Okay, I've got 10 minutes left, and that's slide 1 of 6 or 7. I may be teaching next week. I don't know. Okay. What it says over and over again about these guys is, and he died. That's said of 8 of the 10 patriarchs in Genesis chapter 5. He was born, he lived this amount of time, he had some kids, he lived after those kids were born for an amount of time, and he died. The 9th, actually the 10th of the patriarchs, but a 9th, in chapter 9 and verse 29, the same thing is said of him. That's Noah. He died. And there's a reason for that. Hebrews 9 and verse 27, it is appointed for all men to die. And after this comes the judgment.
And only one had the ability to take up his life and innocent
Yes.
Christ.
Yeah. There are a number of people who were raised from the dead, but they died again. Jesus is the only one who was raised from the dead, never to die again.
Don't forget Elijah. He didn't die, he went up in a whirlwind.
We'll get to it. Okay, whose gravestone is missing here? Yeah, his name's up there in his picture. That's exactly what he looked like. Enoch did not die. Chapter 5 and verse 24. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Hebrews 11 verse 5 says, he did not see death and was not found because God had taken him. Okay. Now, Tammy, and Enoch and Elijah were the only 2 people who never experienced death. What happened to Elijah? A fiery chariot with fiery horses, and he got in that and was taken up into heaven in a whirlwind. Only 2 men to never experience death. What we're told about Enoch is that he walked with God. And life is described as a walk that we take along a path. It's described that way over and over and over again. Matthew 7, 13 through 14, 2 general paths we can go. One is a broad way, and many are going to find it. The other is a narrow way, and few find it. What's at the end of the broad way? Say again? Yeah, destruction. The end of it is destruction. What about the narrow way? Eternity. Yeah, life is at the end of that, eternal life. And what Jesus says there in the Sermon on the Mount is we've got a choice about what path we go down. John chapter 8 and verse 12, Jesus puts it there, the distinction between the 2 paths that we have a choice on is we can go down a path of darkness or we can go down a path of light. God gives the light. Jesus gives the light. If you're not in the light of Jesus Christ, then you are walking in darkness. John 11, 9 through 10, describes it as the difference between walking down a path during the day and walking down a path during the night. What's the difference between those two? You'll stumble. If you walk during the night, you're going to stumble. If you walk during the day, then you will walk in the light and you will not stumble. Romans 13 and verse 13, we are encouraged to walk properly in the daytime and not in the night. Ephesians 4 verse 1, walk worthy of your calling. I think that was in one of my sermons recently about walking worthy of our calling. That doesn't say that we earn our salvation. It doesn't say that when we walk right, we walk this perfect path of rightness, we get to the judgment throne of God, and God says, well, congratulations, you're perfect. You never sinned. That's not what he's talking about there. To walk worthy of our calling, God has called us to something. Salvation obligates us to something. God's not just calling us to salvation. He's calling us to discipleship in Jesus Christ. He's called us to walk as His children. And what Paul says there is we need to walk worthy of that. We need to recognize what Christ has called us to and the obligations that we have. And we need to try to the best of our ability to fulfill those obligations. Yes, sir.
We can partially earn our salvation, because if we don't do the things that God tells us to do, we give away our salvation. So we only gain our salvation through the grace of God. But if we don't do some of the things that He's told us to do, we won't have any chance.
Yeah, I would word it different than we partially earn it. I would say we don't earn it at all. What we do is meet those conditions in which God gives us salvation as a gift. Yeah, and that's what we need to recognize. What the world needs to recognize is that the free gift is free because we don't earn it. It's not free because there are no obligations.
In either case, if you don't follow the commandments of God, you have no chance.
Yeah, exactly. And that's those obligations that are ours. Yes, sir.
I think there's two different ways of looking at work and faith. We have to work. James and Paul seem to be in contradiction, but they're not. Work is obedience. Faith is a obedient faith. It's not a meritorious work. It's an obedient work.
Exactly. Martin Luther.
Semantics.
Yeah. Martin Luther read Romans, and he saw that salvation was not by works. And then he read James and saw James say that salvation is by works. And so he could not make the two agree with one another in his mind. And so he came to the conclusion that James was a bogus epistle. It was what he called it, an epistle of straw. What he didn't understand was that James was not saying that we earn salvation, and Paul was not saying. They were saying the same thing.
Yes.
It's just Paul was saying salvation is based on our faith. And James was saying, understand this, without obedience to God, there is no faith. You show your faith by your obedience. And so Paul was not saying salvation was by faith on some mental assent only. And James wasn't saying that salvation is earned because you do stuff. What they were both saying was salvation is by faith, but you show God that faith. If there is no obedience to God, that indicates there's no trust in God, no faith in God.
Salvation is a free gift, but it has conditions.
Exactly.
Just like I could lay on say, this is yours, but you gotta come and get it. It's free, but you have to do something to realize it.
Yeah, so if you lay $100 bill down on that chair and say, Jerry, you have to walk over there and get that, and so I walk over and get it, do I owe you a thank you? Because I've earned that $100. Because no, yeah, and we all understand that the condition that is required is not something that merits the gift that is given, and that's all James is saying in James chapter 2.
Isn't it funny that when he chose which book to say was bogus, he chose the harder,
Yeah.
right? The easier one must be the way to go, just gotta
Yeah.
have faith there, let's choose
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He chose one that was bogus, he chose
And
the easy one.
well, bless his heart, Martin Luther had a lot to overcome. You know, he came he fell short.
Fell short.
He fell short, is what I'm trying to say, of salvation meeting God's conditions as they're laid out. But I tell you, from where he came a long ways. And his rebellion against Roman Catholicism was that Roman Catholicism was saying it's all about works and nothing about faith. You can buy your way into heaven. You give the cathedral enough money, and they will sell you. You know, in Roman Catholicism in that day, I'm not sure how that has nuance today, but back then, the Roman Catholic Church was building these great cathedrals, and they needed money.
Sale of indulgences.
You could buy the opportunity to sin. They would sell you, you know, if you paid them enough money, you could commit a sin, and that sin was already forgiven by the priest because you had paid him to give you that. It was called indulgence. Yeah, and
They still do it now. You give more money, they do say more prayers to get you into
yeah,
heaven. You know, after you die, prayers to get you into heaven. And he'll pray for you, like if you give $10, he'll pray for you X amount of time. But if you give 1,000, he'll just keep praying you into heaven still.
yeah. But that's what caused Martin Luther then to start questioning things. Caused him to put those, was it 98 theses or whatever that he nailed on the door of the cathedral.
We could pay for our new building,
Right?
I don't think you'd get many takers here. I don't think you could flim-flam us enough to do that. Okay, that was our bell, and so we're going to stop for now. And,
How many more weeks do you have now?
I'm going to have to come up with some extra stuff for next week to make it. But that was, I guess, 3rd out of 6 charts, maybe, something like that. But the last 3 charts are a little shorter. Thanks for your participation.